Well, good morning, one and all. It's Robert Phoenix here, and I'm joined by none other than the Astro Cat himself. I want to just make a little bit of an adjustment here. Let me see if I can do this. How do I want to do this? I want to do it let's see, like this maybe. Uh, uh, uh. Oh, hold on. How about this? Let's do it like this. Yes, yes. Hold on. Now we gotta. There we go. There we go. That's much better. Yeah, I was a little low in the horizon. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of like when you've got to have the right. Back in the old days when I studied telecommunications. Yes, I know that there's a thing called headroom, and that's about the right requisite headroom to have during a broadcast. Maybe even a little bit lower. See, the Virgo in me is coming out now. I do have it sometimes. I do have it. So let's try that. Hold on. Hold on. There we go. That's perfect. Anyway, good morning. How is everybody? Welcome to another edition of the Astro Weather. I was just going through all the greetings in chat. My God, you guys are amazing. I just have to say, you're amazing. The spirit and good cheer and overall positive vibes are really very inspiring. If I was new to the chat room, I'd say, "Wow, I like this place." Right? Like in the midst of everything that's going on in the world, that there's a real sort of island of sanity in there, and it's clear that you care for each other, and it's amazing to me how it's kind of like you kind of we're all kind of total strangers. Like I mean, I know some of you have met each other. It's not like you haven't met each other, but a lot of you haven't. And the care and the kind words for people who are a few pixels an image and a few lines in the screen are it's tremendous to witness and watch, and actually gives me some hope for the world that we're living in. It's like a pocket of to me, hope always feels a little watered down. It's like a pocket of faith. Chattaria is like a pocket of faith. Anyway, we're going to get into the astro weather. I don't know how much you were tracking what was going on last night, but the DNC was absolutely throttled by protesters. So this is in Washington, this Democratic National Committee, and the pro-Palestinian crowd was out in Moss last night, and they had to call out the DC. The things that they never did during the summer of Floyd, they're starting to do now, which I find very interesting. It's like, that's not that important, but this is very important. So it was incredibly violent, and if you just kind of scan the violence meter around the world, shit is get like even in Congress. What was it? Kevin McCarthy like shoved this dude. Like there were a number of fractious events in Washington D.C. feels like a ticking time bomb. I mean, just those two events alone, like the riot at the DNC, and then and it was a riot, it's a protest that was really kind of erupted into a riot, and then the skirmishes that they had in the Capitol, and then you factor in like the Draymond Green fight from 2 nights ago, where he was literally choking Rudy Gobert. Um, you can just feel this conjunction of Mars and the Sun starting to really build up. So why don't we start there and get into the Astro Weather? Let's see, what do we get? Is that the right day? And I have to go back to my new way of presenting the content. It's right there. Okay. Pretty clear. Let's do that. So here we go. We're tracking the Sun and Mars. So tomorrow's the day. Tomorrow's the day where we have the Sun-Mars conjunction and things get very, very tense. Even more tense than they are now. Very tense. So from a personal standpoint, and we'll always bring it back to the personal, how do you channel that intensity? It always helps if you know where Scorpio is in your chart on the personal level or whatever. Whenever we're talking about some of these major transits, it's always good to know where they show up in your chart. And by the way, you can get a free chart at astro.com. All you have to do is type in your date of birth, time, place, and they'll give you a free chart. And then you can figure out, well, we're a Scorpio. So this is kind of like my chart in some ways. I'm actually a late Scorpio rising with an intercepted first house in Sagittarius. So I actually have the Sun-Mars conjunction, but it's closer to my ascendant versus my 12th house. And every time the Sun goes into my 12th house, this time of year, I really just, well, because I have my Sun in the 10th house natally, but I really just want to disappear when the Sun is in the 12th house of my chart. But obviously I can't because I do this. But then, every 2 years it's Mars, and I always get a little trepidatious when Mars goes through my 12th house. Like who's gunning for me? Is there something at a level that I can't comprehend that is making my life more difficult from a place I cannot see or understand? In 15 minutes of flame, it will be on Rumble, not Rumble. Apologize. It'll be on Boxcast today, and I unfortunately don't have the link yet because there are some bugs I'm working out with Boxcast. But it'll be on Boxcast today, so everybody who normally goes to the 15 minutes of flame site but watches on Rumble instead, well, you can go to Rumble. I'm sorry, Rumble Boxcast to check it out. Because yesterday, this gets into the Astro Weather. 2 days in a row, on Tuesday and Wednesday, while transmitting on Rumble, my stream stopped almost at the exact same time that it stopped the day before. So that was really weird. And then not only did it stop, my entire screen got frozen. So I had to reboot 2 days in a row. And the first day, which was Tuesday, seemed to be better. Yesterday, there was no improvement. And it was like I was streaming through a fishbowl with water, and the fishbowl wasn't all that clean. And I got incredibly frustrated. So I stopped the show, and then I deleted the show. And that gets really into my 12th house Mars Scorpio, paranoia. Like, why is this happening? And it feels like, because it's not the computer and it's not YouTube, because we're having a really nice clean stream today. But on Boxcast, it's like, something's happening over there. So this is where I'm trying to work with my Mars. And so, this is a really good exercise. Like, these planets will be, if you have either water or earth, with the exception of Taurus, these planets will be in sextile and trine with those planets. And so knowing where those planets are in your chart can make this easier for you. So today I have transiting Mars beginning to have a much tighter sextile with my natal sun, which means that hopefully I'll have some staying power and some perseverance so I can work through this shit. Right. But on a more collective level, or us, the tension is rising, no doubt. And the square with Saturn is rising. And again, I was watching this beef with Candace Owens and Ben Shapiro, and now it's devolving. I guess I've used the word devolving. Now it's devolving into religion, right? So we have Saturn in Pisces, and it's very interesting that Candace Owens has been. It's just fascinating to watch. Now, some people believe that, well, why can't they just handle this on DMs, or why can't they pick up the phone and just call each other? So some people think that maybe it's just a show. You always have to leave that possibility out there, right? But the real knot around this is religion, because Candace used a Bible post, and there were a ton of people who were accusing her of being passive aggressive and um, hiding behind scripture, right? So we're in Saturn in Pisces territory, and she used the phrase at the end, Christ is king. Now, all that is intentional because she knows that Ben Shapiro doesn't follow that faith, right? And so what she's trying to do is smoke him out. And then again, but what it does is it separates the masses, right? The wheats from the tares, using biblical reference there. So this is where we are right now, and there's just even though we're dealing with water, there's so much intensity and so much violent pushback on hierarchy and systems. And we're coming into Friday, which is when they have, the big news dumps are on Friday. Uh, we're in serious territory here, because the energy has been building. And I talked about this with the new moon and Mars and the sun. I didn't talk about it over the weekend because I wasn't here, but I talked about it on Tuesday. And I said that there's this energy of vengeance that's brewing in the air, right? So again, going back to Draymond Green and Rudy Gobert, Draymond Green has hated Rudy Gobert for years and was just looking for some excuse to go in and choke him out. That's exactly what I was talking about, right? Like there's this vengeance, this energy of vengeance is in the air. And if it's not historical, clearly it can be manufactured. So we're in a very, very, I think, tense situation as we enter into this Sun-Mars conjunction. Now, again, we can see here that we have a nice sextile going in with Pluto. And if you are able to deal with and navigate through some of the blockages with this Saturn, because the Saturn square is a blockage, right? But these with Saturn, I'm sorry, with squares and Saturn, because squares are Saturnian, they are there for you to grow, right? So can you use the full power of the Sun and Mars and Scorpio, which is very powerful, by the way? Can you use that to build versus destroy? That is the question, right? Because Scorpio tends to be destructive, and we've seen some of that destructive energy taking place in places like Iceland. The whole geothermal tension in Iceland, right? Uranus, the Earth, Taurus, Scorpio, the underworld, the molten expression of life force, right? So we can see that. We can definitely see that from a geo perspective. But and it's interesting too, because Iceland is it's built on that relationship with the geothermal power. I mean, everything in Iceland's pretty much run on steam. It's kind of cool, actually. So what are you going to do with the energy? Are you going to be self-destructive and tear it down, or will you use the persistence? Will you use the persistence to um, build? Think of the Sun Mars here as really high pressure water, and Saturn here is going to be like granite or earth, and the high pressure water can break down some of the barriers and the obstacles that are inherent in this, right? So there is a intense and persistent energy here, right? And maybe you have to do two things simultaneously. Maybe you have to tear one thing down while building another. I mean, it is the end times, so we should be multitasking. So this is again, I can't stress enough how powerful this is. And there's this temptation of, wanting to stick a dagger in somebody else's back. And that's really the big energy here as well. It's like, oh, I can get away with it. I get away with it. I get away with it. Not really. Not really. I'm not a big believer in karma, but there are always energetic repercussions for the things that we do. All right, let's talk about the moon. The moon is transited into Capricorn. Yesterday, it was more in Sagittarius. It was more ideological and again, kind of religious. Like there's some religious fanaticism going on out there. I saw this one. I saw this one response to Candace Owens's post, and it was this guy, and he was some religio-tard. And by the way, I don't. If I'm not an opponent of religion, right? I'm not an opponent of it. It's when it becomes something that is used as a cudgel, that's when it's problematic, in my humble point of view. And this guy was saying something to the effect of that Candace doesn't understand the relationship between Israel and Christianity, blah 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 blah. And I wish I saved it. And he comes in and he says, well, first she has to do this, which is admit her error, and then repent, and then I will give her grace. Now, why does this guy, or how does this guy have the power to give Candace? And again, I'm not a huge Candace Owens fan. I don't subscribe to any of her channels. I don't watch her shows. But what gives this guy the power to give her grace? I mean, this is where it gets all twisted up. And that was during the Sag moon, those final degrees of the Sag moon last night. So now the moon is in Capricorn, and it's much more austere and chilly. And I think we all have to watch out for assigning blame to people in our lives right now that don't deserve it, right? Because we have that Moon Neptune square, which is really kind of an aspect of hyper victimization, and it's just coming off of it's just coming off of that angular relationship with Sagittarius and Pisces. So as we go through the day and the moon progresses, it's going to ebb, right? That influence is going to ebb. But early in the day or wherever you are, that influence is going to be tangible. Watch out for the woe is me, because especially during the morning hours, because you're setting your template for the rest of it. Watch out for woe is me. It's passing. It's a passing phase. Just watch it pass. Watch it pass. Also, with the moon squaring Venus, I think we have to have a realistic expectations of what we expect from other people in relationship in the early part of the day or in your evening hour, right? Like we have to have realistic expectations, because the moon in Capricorn can be really hard, right? It's squaring up against Venus and Libra, which just wants to make peace, which just wants to hang out. drink good wine, listen to good music, have some charcuterie. The moon square Venus is like, why would you want to do that? Well, that's what the bourgeoisie do. It reminds me of the scene from Kiss of the Spider Woman, where William Hurt is in jail with Raul Julia, and William Hurt is eating an avocado, and Raul Julia is aghast because the avocado is something that the bourgeoisie eat. Like, how could you eat that avocado? And William Hurt's character says, "Well, because it's delicious." Right? Sometimes an avocado is just an avocado. So this is, again, early morning, evening, wherever you are, have reasonable expectations. This too shall pass. Now, if there is cause for you as an individual to see a relationship in a light that you haven't seen it before, I would say wait at least 24 hours to do anything about it, right? Don't be reflexive. Do not be reflexive because you don't have all the information, especially with the Moon Neptune square. Okay. What else we have? Sun and Mars. They're starting to well, they're getting right in that pocket, aren't they? 24, 23, Neptune's 25. It's actually really interesting trine, given all that's happening in the inner sky. It's a really interesting trine, and it's a trine of compassion and creativity, and not assigning blame, right? Because Mars theoretically makes us accountable. I do like the Sun Mars conjunction. If you are wanting to use that, I mean that's very powerful. When you get Sun and Mars together, it's extremely powerful. So and it's fixed, right? So you can make changes in your life during this period, but you're making changes amidst all the uh, intensity and cacophony that's around us. And Neptune, again, we talked about this yesterday, the difference between really slamming into something or going with the flow. And yesterday I slammed into something during the show. And what did I do? I decided to just end the podcast because I didn't like what it looked like or where how it was going to look when it was done. So I went with the flow and I just got in with the rest of my day. I was still not happy, but sometimes I have to take my own astrological advice here. It's just the way it goes. Mercury started to move out of that square with Saturn. So communicating, which has been a bit of a challenge over the last couple of days, probably about the last week with that Mercury Saturn square, that's going to ease up a little bit. And we still have that sextile with Mercury and Venus. So being an advocate for your own rights or for others is still in play. And with sextiles, we know that to do that, you have to essentially act or activate through the sextile. All right, so there's your astro weather for the day. And why don't we get into our star of the day? Our True Hemp Science star of the day is none other than not that. Terence McKenna. To say that Terence was unique would be an understatement. Terence, even though he was born in Hotchkiss, Colorado, spent most of his time in the Bay Area. He studied at UC Berkeley. He studied anthropology and made California in Northern California his home for most of his life. And I kind of knew Terence a little bit. I knew a good friend of his did his video work, and I would see Terrence around. My friend Stephen Kent did a video with him and this guy named Space Time Continuum called Alien Dreamtime. It was an event, live event in San Francisco. It was kind of at the height of the Archaic revival, and McKenna was in full glory then. He was reading passages from his books, and then my friend Steven was playing didgeridoo, and Jonah Sharp, Space Time Continuum, was doing all the electronic stuff. Rozak's video, my friend Ken was doing all the visuals. It was fucking cool, right? Like they just don't have shit like that anymore. And I didn't realize then, I mean, you just think at that time, I was in my 30s, and you just think at that time that all this is just going to get better and better and better and better and better. And then looking back, I realized that that was really about as good as it got. And it was pretty damn good. So Terrence is an interesting character because, of course, he's a 12th house character. Right? And for a 12th house character, Terrence was everywhere. And there's this idea that 12th house characters really, really want to be seen. And I'm not sure if that was really what Terrence was up to, although he didn't have any problem, speaking or talking. Or I remember one time I ran into him at the Whole Life Expo in Austin, and we were in the same food line, and I looked at him, and I'll save this part for the end of Terrence's breakdown. But anyway, yeah, I'll save that part. But he was a 12th house person, and he was really unafraid of diving into that 12th house, because the 12th house, I talk about the 12th house as the house of the soul, but it's more than that. I guess if we want to expand the meaning, it takes you out of the chart. So Terrence was a psychonaut of the first order, right? So with his sun in the 12th house and that conjunction with Juno, he was really in this deep exploration to find something new, right? And what it was the term that McKenna used around something new: novelty. Right? Novelty. Now, there are people, Jan Irvin, I think, is probably the biggest proponent, who believe that Terence McKenna worked for the CIA, that he was kind of another version, a later day version of Tim Leary, who was definitely a CIA. He was a spook. I think Terrence probably got some research money through a foundation or a grant or an endowment that was probably linked to the CIA. I'm sure that occurred, because he had to go to Mexico and do all this research, right? So, and he was going to UC Berkeley. DARPA is, on the hill above UC Berkeley. It's been there for a while. So, there are rumors that Terrence was a spook. I wouldn't say he was a spook, but at a certain point, he probably did have some money that was funneling through to him from various agencies. Whether he knew it or not, I don't know. But he's a very interesting character, and he has the moon in Virgo as the highest planet in his chart. And, there is something very lunar about McKenna, because, his narrative, his dialogue is not Apollonian. It's not, based on the full light of the sun and the revelation of the mystery. McKenna's work is much more inferential. Like, you have to read into it, read between the lines. He's not always an easy read, but if you stay with McKenna and, get through sort of the density of the language and what he's trying to say, he's a fascinating character. And that's a lot more lunar than it is solar. Solar will give you a guidebook. Solar will give you bullet points. Lunar won't do that. Even lunar in Virgo won't do that. And it's in the 9th house. And so, of course, we understand and realize that the 9th house for McKenna is Mexico, where he first encounters the mushroom and copious amounts of mushrooms. He did that work with his brother over here with the true node in Uranus in the 7th house in Gemini, Dennis McKenna. They researched together, they wrote together, they were tight. right? So you can see, and partnership on a marriage level for Terrence was always weird. I think he went through about 3 marriages, and I probably was probably not an easy guy to be with. But on one level, he was very mellow, and on another level, I think living with Terrence's uh, relationship with inner space might be tricky, right? Saturn Pluto conjunction, and what do we know about Saturn Pluto? Well, in the right context, is somebody who becomes an authority, and clearly for a period of time, McKenna was the voice of the entheogen world, right? He was the guy, and some people would say, well, he was the latter day version of Tim Leary. You can make that case, but McKenna's, I think, more brilliant than Leary. And what's also interesting about McKenna is his relation with Mercury on the ascendant, and he had this very unusual way of talking. And I think for him, he probably had to overcome some real deficits in his chart with that moon in Virgo in order to articulate the language of the psychedelic experience. And he even talks about how when he was in the DMT space, that he would communicate in these clicks, right? And you would kind of get that with Mercury here on the ascendant, right? And in Sagittarius, it would be, how do I communicate something that's really expansive and kind of beyond the scope of my neurons and synapses? How do I communicate that, right? So, and again, the square with the moon would be indicative of something like that. And I'm sure he said a few things in his life that it would be very Sagittarian like and not very quote unquote kind, right? Sagittarius has a very interesting relationship with the truth. And he was a quester, with Mars. It was like, let's go where no man has gone before. And you can just see the heroic dose, right? The Mars Pluto trine is the heroic dose. Terence McKenna did not have an addictive personality, which is fascinating. That's usually observed by Neptune, although he did have a bit of an obsessive personality. And you'll see that with a Jupiter Pluto square. And again, Jupiter brings more of something like, anything worth doing is worth overdoing, which is Jupiter's maxim. So Jupiter Pluto square, give me more. Let's see how far out we can take this. I mean, you can see the psychonaut in McKenna. It's there. It's in the chart. He's an unusual person in the sense that, he's going to be an experiencer. He's going to tap into the 12th house, which becomes the psychedelic void. He's going to establish himself as, for all intents and purposes, as an authority. And then everything is going to become personal. But other areas of Terrence's life, like I said, with the relationship, didn't always work out. So we can see a chart like this, which is basically a wide bundle chart. Well, I guess you'd have to say that Uranus would turn it into a bit of a bucket chart, which would be unusual. It's like a bucket bundle hybrid. But he was not always the easiest person to be. He had a mission. Terrence had a mission. And that mission ended in 2000 when he died of a brain tumor. And this gets back to the story that I was in line and I was having food at the Whole Life Expo in Austin, and Terence McKenna, this is 1996, was next to me in line, and I looked at him, and he just didn't look good. He looked old, and he looked tired, and he wasn't that old. I mean, at that time, Terence McKenna was 50. He looked like he was about mid 60s. It was like, wow, what's going on with Terence? I said hello to him and chatted a little bit, and I watched him eat his scrambled eggs and whatever else he had for breakfast. And he looked old. And well, 4 years later, he would actually 3 years later, he'd be diagnosed with a tumor, inoperable. And then in 2000, he would be gone. And if you look at that period of time, Pluto was in Sagittarius during that time. And it was right around there, right? It was right around his ascendant and Mercury and Mars. So he had Pluto in his first house. And Pluto is transform or die. And in Terrence's case, ultimately in the body, it was the latter. So I don't have the exact coordinates, but I know where Pluto was during that time in Sagittarius. And, with the South Node, in Sagittarius. It's kind of interesting. You know, it's kind of like, well, how far do you want to go? And is going too far too far? Maybe that was the case with McKenna. Maybe he stepped over some dimensional boundaries and lines, and that perhaps there were repercussions for things like that. I'm not saying that there are, but perhaps there are. And maybe that was the result, because everything, it took place in the head, right? And the first house is the head. It's the head of the chart, right? This is your face moving, looking out into the world. All right. So there's your True Hemp Science star of the day, Terence McKenna. And why do we like True Hemp Science? Well, we love True Hemp Science. We don't just like it. I didn't even share it. Oh my God, look at that. Look at that. I didn't even share it. Shame on me. There's Saturn, Pluto. There's that moon in Virgo. There's the 12th house that I was talking about. There's Mercury on the ascendant in Sagittarius. There's Mars in Sagittarius. There's his brother Uranus in the true node in Gemini, his research buddy. Dennis McKenna's a nice guy, by the way. I talked to him. Cool dude. So there's his chart, right? The bundle bucket hybrid. And this is where Pluto was, right around there, the time of Terrence's death and passing. Very interesting character. Very, very interesting character. All right, so let me do this. Let me throw the banner up there. Got to have our banner. There it is, right there. So here's the beautiful part. If you go to truehempscience.com, which is the sponsor of our show, and you can really deal with things like mental health by using their products. All you got to do, spend $100 or more and type in 15MINS, and you will get a free goodie bag when you do that. That's truehempscience.com, your number one source for all things CBD on the internet. Don't forget that 15MINS to get your free goodies. $150 more, get your free shipping. And there's always a 30-day money-back guarantee. All right, I got to go. I've got to go get over to Boxcast and set up the stream. So thank you for being here. I don't know who's going to be on the show tomorrow. TBD. Use your head in order to discern what's real, your heart to step into what's possible. I'm Robert Phoenix. You are you, and have a blessed day and a great earth wall.